Good morning, everyone. It's a cruisy 6 a.m. here, so forgive any small ums or ahs as we go through this. And as with any live demo, expect maybe 2.5 things to go wrong, but I think we'll be pretty good. So I'll jump right into a screen share and we can start talking about Bookshop. So Bookshop is an open source component development workflow for static websites is one way that we dub it. It's open source here on our GitHub, and it is generic across multiple SSGs right now with more to come. But of course, today we're here to talk about Bookshop with Hugo specifically. So Bookshop, it isn't a framework, but it is a toolkit. So it integrates with your Hugo site and gives you a lot of developer and editor tooling, but without getting in the way of any of your production workflows and without making you move to an actual JavaScript framework, for example. So to show you the rough direction that we're heading, I'm going to show you our new share template on Hugo. If you're on CloudCannon, you can come in and spin this up as long as you're on the CloudCannon beta. If you're not on the CloudCannon beta, you can go down to your user account and move to the CloudCannon beta. This template uses some new features that we've got, so it's only available there for now. So if we hop over to our pages and our home page, we can see a site using Bookshop. So these sites are generally built out of structured data that lives in the front matter of your page and is assembled on the page. So with Bookshop, we can actually hide this sidebar and we can click directly on the page, find what we want to edit, click on it, and change our text. And Bookshop will re-render that live in the browser. When you first see this, a lot of people assume that you must be writing these components in React or Svelte or something very JavaScript-y, but Bookshop actually integrates directly with your Hugo partials. So these are still all Hugo partials under the hood, and Bookshop will render them for you live in the browser. Why we call this a page building experience is that with CloudCannon's structured data and Bookshop components, we can actually come in here and add new components to the page. We can build one up from scratch. So we'll add 2 columns. And we can jump into our 2 columns. My computer likes me screen sharing and doing a lot of things. And we'll jump into our left column and we can add some content blocks here. So I'll add headline. Headline looks good. And then we can jump into our right column and we'll come in here and we'll just add an image. We'll browse for images and we'll just drop our hero in there. There we are. And then we can actually come over into our left column and we can align that text into the middle. We could give this a background color if we wanted to. There's a lot we can configure in here. I'd say what's most impressive about these is that unlike a system like Squarespace, these aren't components that you're locked into. These aren't sort of the components that CloudCannon has. This is a generic interface over your own components that you can write. And that's what we're going to be covering today. We're going to be covering sort of going from absolutely nothing towards this through the first principles of Bookshop, so that hopefully you get a good understanding of what Bookshop is and isn't, and specifically what it's doing under the hood. So with that in mind, we'll jump over to our wee site here. So I've got a site called Berg. It's for a theoretical burger restaurant. And to start us off, we'll just spin that up in a browser. So if we load up our Hugo site now, you'll see our wee burger website. So I've done this super lean intentionally so that we're not distracted by too much website, and the focus really is on how everything plugs together and what the components are. So if we look at our website currently, we've got the way that you might build the first cut of a website. So I've got two types of components on this website, a hero component and a left-right block. And I've done the work of splitting those out into partials. And then right now I'm just referencing those partials in the layout. So this is the first step of having a component-driven website, but it's not the easiest to edit. It might be the easiest to edit if you're a developer, but once you drop this into a CMS, there's no real structured content around this, and it's hard to know how you would put this in front of an editor. So the first thing we're going to do is move this into a front matter edited site. So to do that, we open up our index here. Let's add an array that we're going to call content blocks. And we'll move our components into that. So just a little bit of text wrangling to do here. But essentially, for each of these components, we're going to want a key, which is our partial to render. And then we can render that dynamically. And then we're just going to want to pass all of our fields in as data. And this will be editable in CloudCannon because everything in the front matter is editable in CloudCannon. And what we'll see that we'll get to soon is how this is editable live and how this becomes structured data. To save us a little bit of time, I have some of this work already done. So let me just hop ahead one step. If my computer behaves. There we go. So here's what it looks like put together with the content in our front matter. And then over in our index here, we're going to range over the blocks, and we'll render each block by just calling it into a partial. Since we've put the name of our partial in our front matter here, then we can just pass that in as the first argument to Hugo's partial and pass in the rest of the object after that, and it will render our partial. And with that, we have what I'd call a rudimentary page builder. And I say rudimentary because we don't yet have any concept of what our structured data is, so what keys are and aren't allowed in these objects. And we don't have any concept of what components we can and can't add to this array. So it's better, but there's still a lot of work we can do. And this is where we'll start connecting Bookshop. So to start with Bookshop, we're going to run npx bookshop/init, and this will just give us a wee shortcut to get a Bookshop folder structure down in our folder. So we'll make a new Bookshop project. We'll call it Berg components Hugo, and I like using YAML. And with that, we've got a folder on disk. So we can see our new Berg components here. And let's just do a walk through what files have been added. So we've got our Bookshop folder at the top with the config file. This is one of those files you don't really need to touch, but essentially this is telling Bookshop which SSG we're using and how we're going to interface with that. So in this case, the Hugo engine. That's how our live editing works. That's how the component browser will work. Below that, we've got components. This is the bread and butter of Bookshop, and this is worth spending a little while on. But the main file that we care about right now is the Hugo.html file. And if we look inside that file, it is just a Hugo partial. There isn't really anything superfluous in here. In most cases, you can just move your partials in, and indeed, we'll be able to just move our partials into this folder structure. It has a subset of Hugo's functionality within live editing. If you check the Bookshop docs, it will mention a few things that aren't possible. For example, getting remote data or interacting with the file system. There isn't a file system when you're live editing in the browser, so there are some limitations. But generally, anything to do with templating will be supported in here. We also have a SCSS file that can be located with our component, and we'll come back to that. And we also have this YAML file, and this file sort of handles the structure of our component and defines our component. So this is everything about how this component is added and edited, etc. And again, we can jump more into this file a little down the line once we have a need for it. So the first thing to do is connect our site to this Bookshop. Oh, and I missed a couple files. If we look in shared, we'll see that there's a little page helper for us that we'll use. And there's also a place that we can just put some global styles that tie into our Bookshop. And then we have a config file. So you'll notice here that our our component library is actually a Hugo module, and that's how we'll connect it to our site. So that's a convenient way to sort of interface your components in with Hugo. And this actually means that you can upload this repo to GitHub and use your components remotely from another repo, really exactly how you would use a Hugo theme. So we want to connect it to our site. So there's a few things to do. I will hop over to the documentation, which I actually have open over here. And we'll see what there is to get started. So we've created our Bookshop. So let's connect it to Hugo. So the most important thing is to add the module in our Hugo config. So we ask for a components.local. I just use that because I'm never going to use these components remotely. So that can be anything. And then we'll replace that path with the path to our actual components, which is Berg components. Then additionally, we import the Bookshop module itself, and this will provide us with the essentially the Bookshop plugin in as much as Hugo has plugins. So it'll give us the Bookshop partials that do a lot of the magic. And additionally, we need to install a few npm packages. So these npm packages, and we'll initialize a new node project, and we'll install those. So these npm packages are for developer tooling and editor tooling. And this is where, if you saw my talk yesterday, you'll know that I'm a big fan of lean websites that don't ship erroneous things to the users. And so this doesn't ship on your live website. We're not rendering content with JavaScript to your users. This is just developer tooling that sits around the conventions that Bookshop asks you to write components in. And there's one other thing that we need to do, which is to initialize our site as a module, just so that we can import components from our site. There we go. Alrighty, so if we run Hugo serve now, ideally it should run and nothing should have changed. We'll see that it's downloading our modules and we're back online with our site. So the first step is moving our components into Bookshop. And that's where we'll start to be able to see some of the benefits. To make my computer a little bit more happy, I'm going to come in here and add node modules to make it. So we saw that we have in our partials, hero and left, right are the blocks that we want to add. So first of all, I'll delete the sample component that Bookshop ships with. And I'll actually use the CLI to spin up a couple of components. So format YAML component, and we want the hero component to be made. And we would like a left-right component to be made. Now back in the code, we should see our two components sitting here. So we'll open these. And we will open our hero and our left-right partials. And as I said, Bookshop components are just partials. So we can take these and paste them in, and we'll delete our partials. There we go. Now, of course, our Hugo site is broken because we're not using Bookshop components. So let's start doing that. So if we look at our index here and our config. So in our config previously, we were asking for partials. What we can do now is just remove the .html. So Bookshop components are referenced by the path from this components folder here to their component. And these can be nested. If we added an intermediary folder here, we might have the component as, say, sections/hero. You can organize that component directory however makes sense to you. Now, in our index, we have to go via Bookshop. So instead of calling the partial directly, we'll call partial Bookshop. This is the main way you interface with Bookshop, and this takes a slice. The first argument of the slice is what component to render, and the second argument is what data to render. And that's what our include looks like. So with that, we can check that, yep, our site is happy. And over here, once again, nothing has changed, but we can see that it's rendering in Bookshop. Because if we dig into here, you'll see we've got some obscure Bookshop comments sitting around. We'll come back to those later, but it's a good test that everything is working. And now we can start to see some benefits. First, I can actually show that we can make this loop a little bit easier. So if we change these partial keys in these objects to be _bookshop_name, and then now we can just change this loop to just pass in the whole object. So the Bookshop partial, if it sees a Bookshop name sitting in an object, knows what component to load up and will automatically render that component. I also showed that little helper page partial that we had sitting around earlier. We can use that and save us this entire loop here. And we can do a Bookshop partial. And we want to pass in, bear with me here. We want to render the page, and we want to just pass it all of our params .content blocks. Doing this step's quite important for live editing, and that's because Bookshop can live render in the browser anything that lives within your Bookshop. And so we have this shared folder that we access via a Bookshop partial. And since we're now in Bookshop, that means that our entire page array can render with Bookshop. And that allows you to rearrange components, add new components, delete them, etc. And since Bookshop has the context that it needs to re-render our page, that all works as we would expect. So while we're here, actually, let's move our styles over. So this is an optional feature of Bookshop, but it's one I quite like. So you'll see currently we have some sass on our site, and we've made files for each of our components, and we're just importing those from our site SCSS. What we can do is we can remove those from there, and we can move these to live in our Bookshop. Hero, left, right, and delete our original SCSS files. Now, of course, we need some way to get these styles into the browser. So I'll go grab that from the documentation, importing Bookshop styles, and we have this little snippet here. Now, one thing that's quite cool about this snippet and this workflow is that you don't have to reference all of your components individually anymore. So if we load this in, the Bookshop SCSS partial gives you a slice of all of your SCSS resources in your Bookshop from all your components. And from there, we can put it through any resources pipeline we want, and we'll get out the other end a style sheet with all of our Bookshop components. So I think with that, we should still be working. I'll restart Hugo just to be sure. And if we check our site, we're still up. One thing, we've lost the gap in between, and that's because our page component by default wraps everything. It doesn't have to, so we can come in here, remove those divs, and there we go. We're back to our site. So there's our first small benefit of Bookshop, is that it co-locates your component files in their SCSS. And that's more of a convention than anything, but it really helps with portable components and finding what you're looking for. But let's jump off to this first biggest benefit of the work we've done so far. In this folder, we can run npx bookshop browser. And we'll see that that found our component library automatically and started hosting something on a port. If we open that, we'll see a little component browser. And in here, we've registered all of our components. And we'll see that they don't really do anything. And this is where that file that I breezed over earlier comes into play, which is that data file. So if we jump back into here, we've got two things that we want to configure. One, at the top, we've got a definition of this component. And below that, we've got the data this component takes. And you'll see that the reason these are empty is because we're not passing them the data that they expect to see. So let's do that. So if we look at our hero, here we're taking title, tagline, image, and image alt. So what we'll do is we'll drop those into our blueprint. So the blueprint here is the structured data that your component expects. I'll just call these all hello world for now, except for our image, which I'll chuck a nice kitten into, which is, as anyone who works with me knows, the thing that I tend to add as my placeholder imagery. And then for our left-right component, we'll do something similar, which has very similar fields here, but also a flip field for whether or not the left-right block is facing left or right. Once again, we'll just start it all off with a nice hello world. I'll go steal our kitten image from before. And we'll say that by default, we don't want these blocks to be flipped. Additionally, we'll give them some nicer names, left-right block, and nature people, And our hero can be smart button. There's very few material icons that I know by name, but these blocks are passed on to CloudCannon to configure your structures, and this icon can just be any material icon key. So with that, if we load back in our component browser, we can see that we're now actually rendering components. So we've got our left-right block there and our hero block. And one thing you'll immediately notice is that they don't look great. And that's because we're currently running the standalone component browser, and we don't have any of our site styles. So we've loaded in those component SCSS files that we moved earlier, but we don't have anything like fonts or colors. And there are a couple of ways that we can solve this. One, we could move our site styles into our Bookshop global folder. This has a few benefits where if those styles are important for your components, they'll be shipped with your Bookshop if you're using it across multiple websites. The other thing that we could do is we can move our component browser onto the site. So let's do that one, because it's generally the way that I prefer to work. So to do that, we'll add a new site to the page. I'm sure many people have their own ways of adding single sites to a Hugo, adding single pages to a Hugo site, but this is the way that I tend to do it. We'll add a components, single.html, give us our block. And then in here, another partial, and we'll ask for the Bookshop component browser. And that one needs no arguments. Now, hopefully, I did everything right. And we can jump onto our site here and go to /components. And magically, our component browsers appeared. The magic step here is that the component browser partial on Hugo will set up all of the DOM structure we need, and it will assume that you're running npx Bookshop browser. So generally, you'll have two terminals open or some build script that starts both of these, and it will embed your component browser on the site. The benefit of doing this is that if we load up our components now, they look correct because we've embedded it on the site, and we can thus inherit all of your site styles. This was actually one of the original pushes for Bookshop before it became a giant live editing toolkit, was that we were often bit by the difference between, say, Storybook and a live website, in that Storybook isn't your website, and so you're inherently mocking a lot of styles. Whereas with the component browser here, we are in our main page column, so they're the right size, and we've got all of our site styles. So we can see a few benefits here. The components that we've made are automatically shown on the page. We can dump them all if we just want to scroll through what we've got available. And as you can imagine, as we get more and more components, this becomes really useful for developers and editors alike. Additionally, we can come in here and we can edit these live in the browser and sort of test around what they look like. Give it some tagline, and maybe we'll try roll a different cat. And you notice actually that this DOM structure here is exactly what we would need to add this component to our page. So if we went back to our index page, we could come in here and we could add our component. And now if we loaded back our actual website, then we'll see that the component that we wanted is now on the page, which is nice. So that's the local development flow. That's the component browser. And that's some of the benefits that we're seeing for local development. So far, we haven't dabbled in anything CloudCannon specific, and so far, this is all stuff that is applicable anywhere. But now we're going to connect this site to CloudCannon. So there's a few things that we want to do there. First, I'm going to give us a CloudCannon config file so that everything works well down the line. And there's two things I'm configuring here. One, I'm saying that I want our pages to open in the visual editor. This is a live editing demo after all. And two, I'm saying that we want our data to be available to CloudCannon generally. We might not get to any data today, but as a teaser, any data files that you have on your site can be accessed by Bookshop components in the visual editor. So you don't have to worry about trying to get that data in or mock it some other way. You can just access your data directly. So with that, actually, let's just commit this and we'll connect it to CloudCannon. So over here, we're in our CloudCannon organization for Berg, and we'll add a new site. Connect my own files from GitHub. We'll call the site Berg Burgers, which is nice. And there we go. And we'll pull up Berg. And I'm on a workshop branch right now. So we'll sync that and then get on to building our site. Build. One thing you'll notice that I'm here on the CloudCannon beta still. There are a few features that we'll use from that, hopping between editors, but it is not required for Bookshop in general. So if we look at our page, one, we'll see that our components page is here, but it doesn't have a component browser. That's something that we'd like to fix. And two, we can see that our page is here and our components are on it. And we can see on the sidebar, we've got all of our components and we can hop in and edit our data, but we don't have anything like the name of the component. And if we want to add something new to this array, CloudCannon doesn't know what we want. And so it just adds another one of the last component, which is a good enough guess, but there's no way for us to add another hero, for example. So we're not yet at structured data. So let's get on to that. So back locally, everything is done in the Bookshop generate package that can be quite magical and ideally works without any configuration. So what we want to do is we'll add a post build script to CloudCannon. And in here, we want to just install and then npx at bookshop/generate and we'll pass it the yes. And I believe that's all we're going to need to do there. There's one other little thing that we're going to want to do, and this is an important piece of glue for Bookshop. So here we need to annotate the entry point into our template. So if we jump off to connecting to CloudCannon, we'll need this little Bookshop bindings line. If you're starting with any of our templates or our Bookshop starter, this will be there for you. But all this does, or the important thing that this does, is it tells Bookshop where the data for this Bookshop component came from. You don't need to tag every component with this. You only need to tag components that are referenced in your site layout with this. And it just takes this argument here, whatever it is, but in a string. So if we save that with our post build script and commit both of those with a garbage commit message and jump off here. Now our site is rebuilding. Let's actually hop over and watch that. Okay, already done. But if we hop over and look at our post build here, we can see a few things. So it automatically found our component library. It automatically found the output directory of our site. It added live editing to a page, and it added the component browser to a page, and built a few other things. If you saw my talk yesterday, one thing you'll know is that I really like running commands after static sites to do things to those static sites, and that's what's happening here. So with that, if we jump into our components page, you'll see that now we have the component browser that we had earlier, except a built version of it. So this one obviously doesn't rely on us running anything ourselves. So your editors can come into CloudCannon or indeed load this site directly if they've got this available. If we open our live preview here, we're on Doting Net, which is great. And we can come in here and browse our components. Or in theory, no, there we go, the images were loading. And again, we can come in here and play with these live. Additionally, and this is where a lot of Bookshop's magic comes in, this page has got a big facelift. And we've suddenly jumped right ahead to a full page building experience with that one command. So first, you'll notice that our components have some information about them. We've got the name of the component. We've actually got the one I created earlier. And we've got the icon that we configured before. If we come in here to add a new one, we get a choice between all of the components in our component library. And that's because they're tagged with content block. And I didn't actually explain that earlier, so. Sorry. So if we look in our components, you'll see that we've tagged these components with a specific structure. This lets you create, say, subcomponents that can't be added directly to the page. It lets you create higher level components that should be added as large page sections, for example. Running out of time, but I'll try to show a little demo of what that lets us do. But if we hop back onto our page here, we can come in here and we can add a new hero block, for example. A bigger wow moment that Bookshop gives us is that we can hide this sidebar altogether, and we can click directly on the page. And we can see that we can open a panel and get a shortcut to where we were in the data editor, but without having to navigate our own way there. And if we type anything, you'll see that our page updates live underneath us. We can update all of our components, and we can come in here and we can move them around. We can come in here and we can add a new component. We'll add a second hero. There we go. And now you can see that we've essentially built what is the start of our own rich, interactive component editing experience. And there was a little bit of boilerplate to add, but not too much. And importantly, we didn't change the contents of any of the Hugo partials from our base Hugo site. There's a lot that we can configure from here. So for one example, these components, while this preview data with the kitten and the hello world is great for our component browser, where we want to see what things look like, that might not be what we want editors to load up initially. And that's why in here, you'll see that we have a preview key. So if we wanted this to load in better, we can go into our preview key and move our fields there. And we could actually initialize all of our blueprint keys just to be empty. Or maybe we do want a default title. We could say that our blueprint has the title of Hello World, and we don't need to specify that in our preview. And there's more that can be configured in here. So underscore inputs will pass along any configuration to CloudCannon. If we want to make something a select input, for example. And you can pass on other CloudCannon configurations here. In our last moments here, I'll jump ahead, not too far actually, but I'll jump ahead and show what component nesting looks like as well. So one thing, let's do burgers. Final. So one thing Bookshop helps you a lot with is referencing components from components. So if you've got a section that can take content blocks, for example, or you've got a hero component that can take buttons. So for that, I'll just connect a new site on our final branch, and I'll also pull up our starter components. So if you're wanting to get started with Bookshop, this can also be a good place to reference. We're still working on this. It's still shaping up, but it's in a pretty good state now. And that share template that I showed at the start uses these components under the hood. But these components live in their own repo. They're built for Hugo. You can come in and steal them. That's what they're there for. But if we look in at our components, and we look at, say, our CTA component and its data file, we'll see that we have some Bookshop shorthand here, is what I call it. But we've got a key called content, a key called blocks, and within blocks, we're saying that this can take any component that we've tagged as a simple block. And when this component is created, we want it to have a headline and a button by default. So with our new site that we're spinning up here, we'll pull this up in the editor and we'll see what I've set up. And I'll actually change my local one over so that we can also see that in the code. There we go. So what I've done here is our client asked us that they want to make a fun burger on the page. And so we've added a burger component, and we've added a bunch of components for all the layers of a burger. And so our burger here is still tagged as content blocks, so we can add it to the page. But each of our layer components here are tagged as the structured burger. So unless we put a burger key somewhere on our site, these aren't going to show up. But in our burger component, we've said that our burger component takes objects of the structure burger, aka our burger can contain burger bits. And by default, we want a few to be created for us. So if we look at what that looks like in CloudCannon, we can grab our homepage here, hide our sidebar, and let's come in here and we'll add a burger. And there we go. And now, since everything in Bookshop automatically gets data bindings and live editing, we can come in here and we can build out our burger. And we can say that we want some cheese above our patty, and we want lettuce on the bottom or above. And maybe we want to come in here and blasphemously add sauce directly on our bun. We could add some sauce there. And you can sort of see that at this point, I'm just having fun. We'll double stack our buns at the top to really load it up. And with that, we've built a burger live in the browser. It's not directly what most people are likely to do, but it's a good example of what Bookshop's structures allow you to do by tagging components as different types and dictating where those do and don't live. And we can load up the site now live. And we've got a little burger. One last thing while I'm here. So let me pull up my folder. So what we've seen is that Bookshop takes your components and creates structured data out of them automatically, configures those all with CloudCannon into CloudCannon structures, and lets you add them to the page and provides live editing around those. One feature that we are working on currently is a feature called snippets. And I've got a wee demo video here that I'll sit over that and play. And with snippets, CloudCannon is going to understand shortcodes as well as partials. And so you'll be able to use shortcodes anywhere in Markdown and CloudCannon. So we can see here that we add to the page a shortcode. We'll just choose the default Hugo shortcode. and we'll fill out its data and give it a title. And now what's cool is that if we hop over to our source editor, we can see that CloudCannon's added just the figure shortcode. We don't have any extra markup, it's there. Now if we hop over back to our content editor, we'll see that CloudCannon reparses that file and finds the snippet again. We can add a new one. Now here you can imagine that this callout is a Bookshop component. And I'll pause for a moment to say that where Bookshop created all of our structured data automatically, Bookshop is also going to automatically create snippets for you. And so that means all of the Bookshop components that you create, you can use for page building, and you can also use for any documentation or blog site by inserting components freeform in your Markdown. And we can see here that actually you can nest snippets. So any rich text editor in CloudCannon can have snippets inserted. I'll let George finish adding his figure here, and then we'll see what this looks like in the code. So we'll hop back over to the source editor, and there we go. We've got the callout nested with a figure inside it, and all of this will work out of the box with Bookshop. But indeed, when this feature ships, CloudCannon will have support for all shortcodes that Hugo ships with, and you'll be able to configure your own. And so that means you'll be able to say what your shortcode is called, what positional arguments it has, what key value arguments it has, and we'll automatically detect any that you've added to your site yourself. And we will also let you add them in the editor. So I know we've got a few people in chat, I think, that are probably quite excited to see snippets on the roadmap. And it's coming, and it's going to work well with Bookshop and let you page build in a different way. And I think that is all I had prepared to cover, which is good because it's been 50 minutes already. So
excellent demo, Liam. I think it's really exciting to see, just see Bookshop evolve and what it's capable of now. Couple of quick questions before we move on to the next workshop. One is, what sort of adoption are we getting with Bookshop? Who's using Bookshop?
Quite a lot, and quite a lot of good adoption. So we've got some of our big enterprise clients using Bookshop. We've got Bookshop on a lot of Twitch websites. We've got Bookshop on, of course, all of our own websites. You can jump into the HugoConf IO source code and you'll see the Bookshop comments sitting around. And one note, those Bookshop comments are all that actually changes on your production site. So one of the benefits of Bookshop is that if you run an HTML minifier over your site, there's no trace of Bookshop anymore. We haven't added JavaScript around things. We haven't wrapped things. It's quite a nice low touch way to add live editing to the site.
Yeah, no, for sure. Last question. What are you excited for on the roadmap of Bookshop? You just mentioned snippets. Is there anything else that you're hyped about there?
Yeah, snippets and Svelte Kit are the next big Bookshop things. So expanding Bookshop to cover some JavaScript SSGs, snippets, and just improvements to the way we build pages, ideally making it easy to configure, really just interrogating the workflow that we use to build our sites and that our editors use to edit our sites in CloudCannon.
We've got a big love heart snippets support from Brian K. Following up with a question, sorry, frog in my throat. Will snippets work for shortcodes within content data in front matter fields?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Anywhere that you can use a shortcode in Hugo, you'll be able to use snippets. And CloudCannon, the snippets feature will work on any text anywhere, and you can build your own snippets for anything. For example, MDX will be supported, MarkDoc. You could even parse HTML if you wanted with our snippets parser. So there's a lot of places this can go.
Brian, when you this is from Brian, when you have it working for Hugo and SvelteKit, my life will be complete. Any word on?
What's the date? Give me 3 weeks, and SvelteKit will be usable. It'll be
Damn, there you go, Brian. You heard it here first. All right. Yeah, thank you so much for demoing today, Lynn. It was an excellent demo, and really excited to see Bookshop evolve and how far it's come. Yeah, it's just incredible what that allows on the Hugo site.
My pleasure.